Good morning, it's Friday the 15th of December here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Europe's central bankers go their own way with vowing to keep rates higher for longer as traders begin to plan for the Fed to cut first.
Hungary vetoes a new EU aid package for Ukraine, leaving Kyiv without new US or European support.
And why Giorgia Meloni and Rishi Sunak are facing controversy over their respective plans to tackle migration.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Europe's central bankers have pushed back against market bets on interest rate cuts as traders begin to align to a timetable where the Federal Reserve reduces borrowing costs first. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey batted away questions about a change in policy in the UK.
We've seen an unwinding of many of the shocks that we had, the big shocks that we had last year, particularly related to the war in Ukraine and so on. But there is this persistent element to it, which we've got to take out. So my view at the moment is it's really too early to start speculating about cutting interest rates. We've got to see more progress.
A third of Bailey's Monetary Policy Committee even voted for a hike in yesterday's decision. They see the UK's tight labour market setting it apart from the US.
Meanwhile, the European Central Bank president says that policymakers should not lower their guard in the fight to bring down inflation. Christine Lagarde spoke after the ECB kept its deposit rate at a record 4% in yesterday's meeting.
We did not discuss rate cuts at all. No discussion, no debate on this issue. And I think everybody in the room takes the view that between hike and cut, there's a whole plateau, whole beach of hold. You know, it's like, solid, liquid, gas. You don't go from solid to gas without going through the liquid phase. So,
Christine Lagarde's words come as Bloomberg reports ECB policymakers are united in expecting to cut rates later than markets anticipate. But traders still see some 150 basis points of ECB cuts next year.
Hungary has blocked a new €50 billion EU financial aid package for Ukraine. The 26 other European Union leaders had supported the deal at a meeting which ended in the early hours of this morning. European Council President Charles Michel says they'll pick up discussions on the matter in 2024.
We will revert to this matter early next year, and we will try to get unanimity in order to make possible for us to implement this.
Charles Michel also stressed a need for unity on the issue among member states. The news comes after EU leaders agreed to open discussions on Ukraine's membership. That was after Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's a vocal opponent of Kyiv's accession, did not participate in the decision.
Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin is vowing to achieve victory in Ukraine. Speaking in Moscow on Thursday, the leader outlined his targets in the region.
The peace will come when we reach our goals that you have mentioned. And coming back to the goals, they remain unchanged. I will remind you, it means denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine and its neutral status.
President Putin there speaking via a translator. The address marks his first end-of-year news conference since the conflict began nearly 2 years ago. US intelligence now estimates that Russia's total troop losses from the war are 315,000 since February 2022. The Kremlin leader plans to stand for re-election also in March 2024. Officials are aiming to portray Putin's widely expected victory as an endorsement of his war in Ukraine.
China's central bank has injected a record amount of cash as the economy falters. The PBOC offered lenders an 800 billion yuan boost in one-year loans, more than twice the amount seen by analysts in a Bloomberg survey. It's a move that will give banks more money to buy government bonds. Economic activity was not great in November as retail sales missed estimates, and the housing market is continuing to decline in terms of prices, sales and investment.
Now, Bloomberg has learnt that Citigroup is to close its municipal bond business. It's one of the most dramatic moves yet by the chief executive, Jane Fraser, as she looks to squeeze better returns out of the Wall Street giant. The bank has decided the business, which has tumbled in the rankings for underwriting state and local debt, is, quote, no longer viable. Bloomberg's Sally Bakewell says it's a shocking fall from grace.
Citi was an absolute powerhouse in this $4 trillion market for US state and for local debt. It helped on deals for some very prominent buildings and landmarks, such as the World Trade Center rebuilding, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey.
Bakewell's team say that according to top executives, the move will affect about 100 employees. In a moment, a €50 billion aid package for Ukraine remains blocked by Hungary. We're going to discuss the European Leaders Summit with Bloomberg's John Fellain, our European government editor. But something a bit lighter. It is Friday after all. Forget leaves on the line. There was a bull on the line in New Jersey, in the United States, I hasten to add, not anywhere in Europe. And so perhaps this is a metaphor for what's been happening in markets throughout this week. Maybe that's the story.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, certainly a lot of bulls to be found yesterday in parts of the market too. But I mean, I'm just imagining the text messages people were sending home on their commutes saying, sorry, train delayed. There's a bull. Cattle
on the line. Yeah, apparently New Jersey Transit say that everything's back to normal, but they had to put out, I think they tweeted out the photographs, obviously. Yeah. And otherwise no one would have believed them.
Right. Okay, well, let's turn back to those big central bank decisions as we are, of course, digesting the week that has seen a pivot from the Fed, but European central bankers not in any rush to start cutting interest rates. After yesterday's decisions, we also have the first PMI readings this morning for December from France, Germany, the Eurozone and the UK. We've got our chief Europe economist, Jamie Rush, with us this morning to explain. Jamie, let's start with the decision from the ECB. How much or how little did Christine Lagarde and company open the door to rate cuts?
Well, they tried a valiant fight back against market pricing, but I don't think they really succeeded. Sadly, the lesson is that when Powell speaks, markets listen. When Lagarde or Bailey speak, they don't really. So what did we see? Well, she pushed back against the idea of any near-term cuts. She ruled out. She said that they did not speak about cutting interest rates, and she did kind of flag. The thing I thought was quite clever was she identified some data that they needed that would only be available after 1Q. So wages data, profits data, that lands later. So I think markets are currently pricing the first hike fully priced is in April. Our forecast is that will happen in June, but it wouldn't take a huge surprise for that to be brought forward. So we'll see what happens with the GDP data. We'll see what happens with inflation, and as I said, it's possible to be sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what did we learn from the quarterly projections from the view from the ECB?
Well, they're kind of reasonably optimistic on growth. They don't see any contraction going ahead there. So there is room in the forecast, therefore, for if we see a weaker performance than that, and the economy slips into recession, then they can obviously point to that and say that that's a good reason to accelerate the cutting cycle. So. And we also know that the inflation numbers are going to come down they're going to go back up, but they're going to go down pretty steeply in the first quarter. So again, there's nothing really constraining the ECB. Inflation's not that bad in the Eurozone. They could cut pretty much any time in the first half if they wanted to. They'll just need to find a motivation for it.
What was it about the bond buying programme, Jamie, that we should be paying attention to? This is the pandemic era bond buying programme, PEP.
So the thing about PEP was that they needed to make a decision about it, or they felt a need to make a decision about it before starting talking about interest rate policy. So it kind of has opened the door or has created some bandwidth for them to start thinking about interest rates. The PEP program is going to be wound down pretty slowly over the second half of next year. That's going to create a little bit of pressure on governments who are still likely to be issuing quite a bit of debt then, but it's not a game changer. They've still got other tools they can use if everything falls apart.
Yes, and when it comes to the new data that we have out of Europe today, what do you expect for the PMI readings?
Well, the PMIs have been showing a kind of a general picture of broad stabilisation of the outlook. That's what we've seen over the past few months. They've been sort of flattish in quite depressed territory, but a little bit flat, with a little bit of improvement last month. So we'll be looking to see if that improvement is sustained. If it is, that would point to the outlook evolving as the ECB expects. If instead we see this, a worsening of the PMIs, that would be a sign that the economy is heading into something more a more protracted downturn perhaps than the ECB is expecting. So they'll be important, and they will be quite a key element to be watching over the next few months as we think about what the ECB is going to be doing.
Jamie, can you help us tie together the central bank decisions that we've had this week? It was a blockbuster lineup. We were waiting to see if this was going to be the start of a global monetary pivot. Is what we've learned at the end of this week that actually it's just a US monetary pivot?
Well, I think that's what we've learned for now. I don't think that there's a good chance that narrative isn't sustained, though. I mean, as we heard, Lagarde, Bailey both pushed back on market pricing and didn't really succeed in that endeavour. So attitudes, of course, could change on the Governing Council, on the Monetary Policy Committee over the next few months, and we could easily see that pivot does, in fact, still take place. But I think the main point, though, is that both central banks are probably going to be a little bit delayed relative to the Fed. So if the Fed goes in March, I wouldn't expect the ECB and the bank to go at the same time.
OK, good stuff, Jamie. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Bloomberg's chief Europe economist, Jamie Rush.
Well, let's take you to Italy for our next story. And the waters of the Albanian resort town Shëngjin, a haven for tourists in search of Mediterranean scenery at bargain prices. And if Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni gets her way, they'll soon be joined by as many as 36,000 migrants as Rome tries to reroute asylum seekers from its shores. It's a controversial immigration policy that has echoes of the controversy facing the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as well. Rishi Sunak is attending, along with the billionaire Elon Musk, a 4-day political event hosted by Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party this weekend. Joining us now is Alessandra Migliaccio in Rome. Alessandra, good morning to you. Immigration is a significant, even a totemic issue in many countries in Europe. What is Giorgia Meloni's plan?
Good morning. Yes, Giorgia Meloni, basically, as many analysts have told us, she's creating a problem that really in a country like Italy doesn't exist. In fact, we need more immigration because Italy has a demographic crisis, and she's finding solutions to the problem, rather bizarre and possibly illegal solutions, but it's doing, enormous good to her ratings because people feel like she's trying to act, and because it's unusual, let's put it that way, it gets all the more attention. And other countries are looking too, because, we do know, as you said, that Rishi Sunak has tried to do something somewhat similar with Rwanda. He's still struggling with that as well. And now it's Meloni's turn, and she's proposing Albania, which is a country nearby. And who knows what they will talk about, when he comes to Italy, possibly about maybe sending some of England's migrants to Albania.
Yes, but how much opposition does Meloni face? Both in her own parliament and also in Albania.
She does. In Italy, she does have a very strong majority, although, of course, many, many people have complained. Humanitarian organizations have complained. Basically, legally, it doesn't make much sense. Also, because you can't, because of laws on people migration, you can't send anyone. So they would have to separate the women, for example, and the children from the men. Essentially, you'd just be sending the men on their own without their families. You'd be separating families. So then you're in another situation that's possibly illegal, et cetera, et cetera. In Albania, she's facing a much more opposition. The president of Albania will also be in Italy this weekend, is all for it. But the courts have said that they need to think about this, and they temporarily stopped the approval from Parliament. Parliament will not be able in Albania to immediately approve this. They have to see if indeed it is legal, because you are creating an enclave that will be managed by Italians inside Albania. And it is absolutely not certain that that is allowed. So there's a lot that points to this thing maybe never happening, but at least, politically she looks good to her voters.
This is all happening as Rishi Sunak and Giorgia Meloni are going to be meeting this weekend at this political festival. Elon Musk is also attending. What's the goal of this event? What does Giorgia Meloni want to show?
I think it's just political. We're looking at European elections coming up. She wants to show that she It's a party conference. It's been going on for more than 20 years, so it's something they do. But she knows that in this case, if she can get people like Elon Musk and Rishi Sunak to come, then she's elevating it to a higher level. It becomes more of a European issue or world global with Elon Musk, really. And he also wants to talk about demographics and about Europe. And that will give her visibility. It will put her in a position where she is no longer a strange, possibly fascist outsider on the far right, but she's much more of, a center-right politician that is someone who could maybe lead the European right in parliamentary elections that are coming up next year.
Okay, Alessandra, thank you so much for being with us. Alessandra Migliaccio there, our Western Europe economy correspondent, taking us through her deep dive into Giorgia Meloni and another controversial migration plan, trying to send some asylum seekers to Albania, facing opposition though.
The European Union leaders will reconvene for their last summit of the year today. On Thursday, they were unable to agree on a new financial aid package for Ukraine, but unexpectedly agreed to open membership talks with Kyiv. Joining us now for the latest is John Fellain, our European government editor. John, good morning to you. So Hungary abstained on the vote, allowing the membership talks to be opened with Ukraine, but it used its veto over the aid package. What happened?
Yes, good morning. Well, it's quite an extraordinary scene. And basically, it was an idea by the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, that the Hungarian Premier, Viktor Orban, basically leave the room to enable the decision on the start of the membership talks to be accepted by the EU leaders, because it does require unanimous approval. That tactic seems to be almost unprecedented. It was not used for the budget, so the decision in the end was to postpone the talks and agreement on the financial aid package for Ukraine into January. The reason being that it's part of negotiations over the long-term EU budget, and that's why Orban is holding out on it. One of the reasons.
Okay. Is there a chance that other leaders could convince Viktor Orban to change his mind somehow?
Well, look, the backdrop to this is, of course, Orban's very close relations with Vladimir Putin. There's not much that the EU leaders can do about that, at least in the short term. So there will be negotiation, there will be wrangling on the budget. One possible plan B is for the other leaders, the 26, apart from excluding Orban, to go ahead on their own and work out a bilateral way of getting the aid package through for Ukraine.
John, what does this tell us about support for Ukraine in the European Union? President Volodymyr Zelensky looks to be struggling militarily, but also diplomatically, to get the international support that he's seeking.
Well, look, the aid package is a very bad look, obviously, given what's also happening in the US with the money being stalled there. So we're going into the new year with both the US and the EU, key allies of Ukraine, of course, not managing to deliver on the constantly repeated pledge of we'll do whatever it takes. The positive sign is, of course, the agreement on starting the membership talks, but even that's not going to happen until March. It's got a huge symbolic value, but in the practicalities is it's going to take years of negotiation. The last member to join the EU, Croatia, the process took 10 years.
Yeah, indeed. And so what about the other countries in the Western Balkans who've also been in the process for many years? Are there concerns that Ukraine's membership will end up perhaps leapfrogging theirs?
Well, there's concern that it's not that the process is not fair, in the sense that obviously there are preferences as to who should go ahead first or not. But the EU leaders did agree to open membership talks with Moldova, and they did grant candidate status to Georgia. So that's all going to keep going. But obviously, it's very, very much tied to the situation, the rule of law in each of these countries, progress on reforms which are essential for the EU.
And as you say, it's a very long process, and many of those countries have been in it for even longer than a decade as well. At the same time, John, we heard also from Vladimir Putin yesterday, his usual marathon news conference returning, very much sticking to his mantras around the attitudes to Ukraine. How is that being viewed in Brussels?
Well, it's provoking frustration and consternation among many because of the failure of the EU to show that it is unanimous in backing Ukraine, especially when the counteroffensive is stalling.
Yeah. The leaders are going to also go on, though, to discuss not just Ukraine, but other conflicts, other issues today, including the Israel-Hamas war. Again, is there a unanimity on the EU's view on this and how to deal with this enormous challenge too?
Well, the EU laid bare its divisions right at the start, just after October 7th, when there was different positions on what to do with Palestinian aid. There are also different positions on whether to have a pauses, ceasefires, which we've seen in the past few weeks. So, but that's expected to be ironed out, possibly with a more general statement. We've also seen agreement by EU envoys on the 12th package of sanctions on Russia, and we're also expecting talks today on migration, but that's a very, very long-term, very divisive issue in which countries like Italy on the front line, which are receiving many migrants from across the Mediterranean, keep appealing for solidarity, for help with returns, for help with dealing with the asylum process. But that's a very contorted issue for the leaders.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.